Hello, everyone. Welcome to Decoding Downtowns, brought to you by Vistity. In this podcast, we dive deep with leaders from business improvement districts across the nation, revealing the strategies that are shaping the future of urban development and economic growth. Thanks for joining us. So, hey, it's Jamie Schwartzman, and welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Cate Irvin. She's the Senior Director of Economic Development with the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership in downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Cate, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, so I have sort of a diverse background, I guess, to say the least. So I have a master's degree in public health with a specialization in international health. And then I have also advanced doctoral studies training in urban sociology. And so kind of with those two combined, I've ended up having sort of a fairly extensive background in urban policy, higher ed, health, and transportation. And so I've kind of worked in a handful of different fields before landing kind of in economic development.
Wow. And so what inspired you then to pivot into econ dev?
So I'd like to think while it was sort of a weird route with a handful of detours, all of the different pieces sort of did, I think, lead me to economic development. So I sort of initially, after college, started off in HIV and AIDS relief work, working in Kenya. And after that experience, that was kind of what led me into getting a master's in public health. And I was like, this is going to be my career forever. I love it. But when I did my master's thesis back in Kenya, I ended up working with reformed gang members that were starting art and garden clubs. And I did a completely different study than the study I thought I was starting off with, but really looking much more at it from like a sociological lens than a health lens. And so I kind of was encouraged, like, go pursue sociology. So I did, and I did a lot of work, kind of a quantitative, qualitative work on gentrification, housing, and sort of how the public space improve and like impacts private development and those types of things, as well as looking at kind of post-disaster recovery, because I was working in New Orleans. And so those kind of pieces started to fit together for me, and I was really interested in how kind of public health and sociology combine into these kind of disaster recovery, spatial development, and economic kind of recovery and development. And so that sort of all pieced together kind of led me onto a path of kind of placemaking, public realm improvements, and then kind of more specifically into the economic development policy.
Cool. And tell me about some of the places that you've been before you landed in downtown Pittsburgh.
Sure. So I was in Nairobi, obviously, for a handful of time and did quite a bit of work both in Nairobi and kind of in some of the rural areas of Kenya, primarily doing medical HIV AIDS relief work. And then from Nairobi, I was in New Orleans for about a decade and did quite a bit of work there while I was also studying at Tulane. And so I was able to do a lot of really unique and interesting projects there, particularly dealing with kind of climate impacted communities, disaster recovery, and the sort of gentrification processes and sort of these public-private developments that happened in the kind of post-Katrina world. And so strangely enough, that led me to the Department of Transportation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which it doesn't seem like it makes any sense. But I really loved, they had a kind of policy position there. And so in that role, I was able to sort of spearhead a lot of our public realm enhancement programs. And so I kind of launched our asphalt art initiatives. I worked on this really cool project with one of our low income communities, kind of creating like public space enhancements to give their outside sort of, which is really just the city sidewalk and street, but we kind of recreated it into a community space with swing sets and everything. It was really kind of fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah. And then when the pandemic hit, we launched Sprouts, which was much more of an economic development program. And it was a program that was working with businesses to expand outdoors so they could continue operating during the pandemic. And so that kind of work was getting my foot in the door of like placemaking economic development. And so a role opened up in Pittsburgh at the Oakland Business Improvement District. So I kind of jumped at it because I was like, all right, Pittsburgh, I'm ready to get out of Tennessee and see what else is out there. And so I moved to Pittsburgh a few years ago, originally kind of doing placemaking, but then was offered a role in downtown to do economic development at a time when things in downtown are really changing. And it's such a fascinating time to be in that role in this moment. And so I kind of couldn't help myself but to move from placemaking into more direct economic development.
So help orient us to downtown Pittsburgh. What's going on in Pittsburgh? What makes it unique and exciting right now?
Sure. Downtown Pittsburgh itself is incredibly unique. I mean, Pittsburgh as a whole is a beautiful and unique city. And I think if you haven't been here, you should. Our geography is incredibly unusual and diverse with the hills and the valleys. It makes it really, really pretty. Downtown Pittsburgh, it's also known as the Golden Triangle. And it's because the way that downtown is built is because it's at the convergence of three rivers that form a geographic triangle, kind of downtown being the peak of that triangle. And so that just makes it aesthetically really interesting because you've got this beautiful waterfront area where we have Point State Park at the very tip. And then you have this compact, flat, walkable downtown with this historic architecture because Pittsburgh was formed in the mid 18th century. So it's an older city. So that gives it a lot of kind of cool historic aspects, as well as unique sort of small neighborhoods that exist within the kind of fairly compact Golden Triangle. It's just walking and moving around downtown really unique and interesting.
What's the sort of the food and the art scene like there?
It's fantastic. That's kind of one of the things we're most known for. So we have what's known as the cultural district in the heart of downtown. And so that's where you'll find our kind of theaters, galleries, and kind of venues. If you want to see like a touring Broadway production, we have amazing theaters for that, concerts and other live music venues. And also kind of through the heart of the cultural district, we have two different sort of like restaurant rows is what I like to think of them as. One is along Penn Avenue and another is on 6th. And they have very different vibes, but incredible, both with great outdoor dining experiences, which really kind of I love because it brings the private into the public and kind of makes it more vibrant and exciting. There's quite a diversity of food in downtown Pittsburgh, which is what I like. You've got like upscale, really high end, if you're looking for something very fancy, perfect date night. But then you've got kind of more casual, fast dining. And then these like kind of little hole in the wall, like, you know, very affordable, grab a bite. There may not be tables and chairs in there. You maybe go sit on a park bench. And so I love that there's all of that kind of in this very compact space.
It's a great American city. So tell me a little bit about the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership. How is it structured and how do you, what's the role it plays in supporting econ dev in your district?
Sure. So yeah, we are a nonprofit community development organization. And so we kind of, our mission is to foster economic development and vitality in downtown Pittsburgh while also kind of improving the overall quality of life. So very small mission, very easily achievable. Kidding. But so we play a pretty crucial role in the sort of ongoing development of downtown, as well as kind of promoting it as a kind of top destination. So a little bit about how kind of we're structured. We have a couple of different funding mechanisms, which makes us a bit unique. So in 1997, the Downtown Business Improvement District was formed, and we manage that district. And so for those who aren't familiar with what a BID is, basically it is sort of property owners within the Golden Triangle agreed to assess themselves and pay kind of a sort of like an assessment fee or tax into the BID every year. And those funds are used primarily for on-street services or our clean and programs. And so that's one of the main ways we're funded. We also have membership-based kind of funds. So we have membership dues. We get some private support, sponsorships, foundational support, and government grants. And so kind of all of those combined form the sort of basis of how we're able to do the work we do. So much of the funding that supports my programs in particular in the kind of specific economic development realm come primarily from grant and foundation support with some private funding as well. So that way our bid assessment taxes can really focus on providing those sort of on the ground services to the properties.
I see. And then the role that you guys play in supporting econ dev?
Yeah, so we have quite a large role, and it's sort of depending on how you look at it, it comes at it from a number of different angles. So we have a large role in the advocacy component. So for example, one of the major challenges I think a lot of downtowns are facing right now is the kind of vacancy in offices. We can dive into that a little bit more. But one of the things that we do is kind of advocate for funding conversions, finding kind of new and innovative ways to get these spaces active. And then we also have direct incentive programs and kind of recruitment programs. So that's things from like a facade program where we have a 50% match to help folks update their facades, really get those buildings looking good and making that on-street experience much better and safer. And then we have rent abatement programs to help downtown businesses kind of survive their first year. We kind of assist them with their rent. We have a pop-up program to fill vacant retail with short-term pop-ups. And by short-term, it's 6 to 12 months, which is a longer pop-up than I think most programs do, with our hope being after 6 to 12 months in a rent-free space, those businesses might be ready to thrive in downtown and kind of make a longer term investment.
What kind of dollars are we talking about here that you guys have put into the community?
Sure. And so for example, with Project Pop-Up, each participant gets awarded a $15,000 grant on top of the free rent. And so we're looking about 6 to 7 pop-ups this year. So that's a substantial kind of a movement in that space. With the rent abatement, we provide up to $2,000 per month or 50% of the rent. So if your rent is $3,000 a month, we'll give you $1,500 a month towards your rent. If your rent is $4,000 a month, we'll give you $2,000. That kind of thing, to really kind of cut your bills in half that first year, provided you're a new business.
And then do you sort of restrict the geographic zones for these things, or is it available?
It has to be within the Golden Triangle. It's within the Golden Triangle.
Okay, so anywhere
within the boundaries.
Got it. Great.
Yeah, and so that really helps. And the same with our facade program. It's up to $50,000 per facade with a 50% match.
Does it make a difference, these kind of programs?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially, the facade program has been going since 2012. So we can quite visibly see the difference of the impact. And especially because it's such a visible program, it's made some really great improvements, particularly if you look at Restaurant Rows that we were looking at. A lot of those restaurants have gone through that program to create a much more kind of permeable facade so that the indoor and outdoor spaces become more fluid. But, we're also working with some of our residential conversions as they're trying to get the facades from office to being much more friendly to residential and retail. And so we're really sort of seeing those impacts and kind of bringing some of our outdated and rougher facades back to life. And, we have a committee with architects and experts that sort of help guide the facade renovations in particular so that they match with the aesthetics and the kind of historic components of the buildings and the neighborhood.
And so then, if you think about sort of vacancies, stabilization, what are the trends right now? Do you think it's stabilized out? Is it continuing to, increase, decrease?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a tough question to answer. And so it also depends on which vacancies you're talking about. If you're looking at
office, I'm thinking office, which is on everyone's mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think office vacancy, I'd like to say it's stabilized. I think we are aware that there's a variety of leases that are going to be coming up for renewal in the next handful of years, next 2 to 4 years. And I think that will have, what happens with those leases will have a big impact. If they choose to renew, if they choose to shrink their footprint, if they choose to move either to another building in downtown or outside of downtown, that will really change that office vacancy rate. And so that's, something that we're watching very closely and in conversation with a lot of our partners, because there's definitely concern if you've got a number of leases coming up in the next handful of years with an already sort of higher than usual office vacancy rate. And, there's a lot of subleasing movement as well. And so kind of we're closely monitoring all of that while advocating for increasing conversions and kind of alternative uses for some of these office spaces.
Let's talk about what's working. So, if you could suggest an actionable step for others who are involved in econ dev, what would you recommend to them?
Yeah. So, I think every community is a little bit different. And so you're going to face slightly different challenges and have different opportunities. I think the biggest piece of actionable advice I could give is really, really prioritize and foster collaboration. Building active, engaged partnerships amongst a whole diverse group of stakeholders, I think, is one of the most important things you can do. Because if you have that group, you can kind of really start coming at your challenges from different angles, and you pull in partners with different capacities and different kind of advantages. And so you really can kind of broaden your capabilities and kind of how to conquer those challenges. And you bring in opportunities you may not have ever realized before. And so that's definitely something that we have especially over the past year. We've always been a very collaborative organization, but we've really increased kind of our partnership and our collaborations. I work with our brokers and our real estate kind of owners significantly more this year than I did in the previous year.
I see. So give us a sense of who those collaborations are with and where you think the highest value ones are.
Sure. So, we collaborate, with the city, for one. I think having good relationships with your city government is extremely important. They hold all of the strings for your permits and everything. So if you want anything to get done, you need them on board, as well as with the county. It depends a little bit on your government structure, but good relationship with your local government is extremely important. We also work really closely with the Allegheny Conference, which is a much larger organization and that can kind of move the needle in much more directions than maybe we have the capacity to. And they have a much greater reach than we do because they're for the whole kind of region. But then we've also been working closely with a lot of our brokerage community. They have their finger on the pulse of what's really happening in downtown. They know who's interested in moving into downtown, what people's concerns are. They kind of get that on the ground understanding. The same with our property owners. But then we also work a lot with our business owners. They see everything. They're the ones out every day, opening their stores, talking to people. So really kind of making sure that when you think of stakeholders, you're really thinking it through in kind of a broad way.
Let's talk a little bit about data and economic development data and what you're tracking, and not just what you're tracking, but what do you think is the most valuable data for investors, developers, and stakeholders?
Sure. We track a lot of data. It's one of the things that I think has actually helped us kind of grow our presence in the partnership world is because people come to us a lot for the data that we're tracking. And so one of the main things we track that maybe other folks aren't tracking as often is footfall data. So we're really looking at foot traffic, and we monitor it very closely for both the Golden Triangle as a whole, but then also our kind of points of interest like the Cultural District or Market Square, which kind of is the heart of downtown, as well as Point State Parks. We kind of understand how people are using these different spaces. And so we're very open to disseminating that information. And I think a lot of folks use it because we can measure against pre-pandemic levels. So we kind of understand our recovery. And we look at not just visitor data, but employee recovery and then residential growth. And so we're able to kind of look at all of that. And I think that's really helpful. Surprisingly, things that I didn't realize that we were tracking that has become really helpful is some of our mobility data, in particular parking garage data. So we track public parking garages. And I have had a number of our brokers reach out to us saying, I really need the parking data. Like I'm using it to kind of help sell this space or to show how active people are. And I was like, I feel like I'm just reporting this out every month. I don't know if anyone reads it, but they do. And so that was a surprise to me how relevant that was. And then the last thing I'll say is sort of, I think the other kind of big piece that we report that others kind of maybe don't have as much access to is our residential occupancy and rental rates. Because I manually collect all of that data and then kind of pull it together every quarter. And so it's not necessarily...
Where do you collect it from?
Property managers, for one. We email out our property managers across all of greater downtown. So we're not just, for this data, we're not only looking at the Golden Triangle, we look at all of the surrounding neighborhoods too. And then we also use some other kind of databases like CoStar to pull any data that we're missing. But that's data that's harder for other folks to get. And so then we anonymize it and collectivize it and then kind of disseminate it so that people understand, hey, we may have a higher than we'd like office vacancy rate, but our residential rates are really strong and like people want to live here. And if there's available units, people are snapping them up and they're willing to pay this amount per dollar, per square foot. And so that's, I think, a really unique piece of data that we provide.
And so now you've got all these data points. How are you telling the story? And how are you delivering this stuff?
Sure. So we used to create a State of Downtown report every year. It was a big to-do printed, multi-page report. And we moved away from that in the past 2 years. So 2021, actually the past 3 years, 2021 was the last time we did it. And instead, we've replaced it with an interactive data dashboard, which gets updated monthly and quarterly, and then with some information annually. So that way, you get a pretty constant snapshot of what's happening. And that we've found to be a really, really useful and kind of strategic way of getting information out to people kind of almost in real time when they need it versus one annual report that by the time you're printing it, the data's out of date.
I see. So you've eliminated the PDF version of this thing?
Yeah, we do have, we do like social media pushes and newsletters will include some kind of narrative about the data in there because it's helpful to provide context and information. But, and we still do our organizational annual report, but having kind of a data-based annual report just didn't seem to make a lot of sense anymore because frankly, people wanted more up-to-date information and it just takes too long to collect a year's worth of data, put it out there, and then it's already, by the time you've published it, you've been working on it for 3 months, whole new pieces of data have come out. So, we've really shifted more to the kind of of the moment interactive data dashboards.
And does this just live on your website?
Yeah, it's embedded on our website. And that way, it's something that I can update very regularly and very quickly. Basically, the data is available. The month ends on the 30th. By the 3rd or 4th, I have the entire month's worth of data and it's up on our website. And so it's very kind of quick. And we do appreciate that. And we know that that's become a big piece for our partners to be able to use that. And we also work with other partners on their dashboards because more people are starting to kind of move into that data dashboard realm because of the kind of instantaneous nature of it.
And are you tracking, usage or people going to that page?
They are. I don't have the exact user numbers off the top, but that's my marketing team would know that. But we do know that we have a very high use rate and a high kind of open rate when we do a newsletter blast about the data. And then we also sort of get the reports from our partners because we provide quite a bit of data to some of the other dashboards.
Right. I guess for this stuff too, it's more about quality than quantity, right? A few really important visits are critical.
Well, and the data gets used quite a bit by our media, so we can see it get published in news articles and that sort of thing. And I like it because we've kind of been able to become an authority on the data of downtown. And so people know that they can come to us, get reliable, high quality data quickly and efficiently, but that, it will be accurate. And it's also really helpful for telling the story of not just downtown on a monthly basis, but, our events and kind of being able to say, like, we put on this big event, like, did people come? And it's like, if you're in the event, you're like, it seems crowded, but actually knowing how crowded it was is really helpful. Like, how many people did we bring? How far away did they come from? All of that is information that we can actually see now. And then, with the dashboard, we can make the data downloadable. So that way, it's not just that you're seeing the visualizations. If you want the spreadsheet, you can just download it and see it for yourself and play around with it a little bit.
That is impressive and enviable for a lot of districts. That's a real significant accomplishment.
Well, they're all welcome to reach out to me. I can walk folks through how to do it.
Right. So let's look ahead for the year. Like, what are your main priorities and initiatives?
Yeah, I think top of mind is the advocacy work on our office to residential conversion and kind of getting this vacant office space transformed into something that's active, whether that's residential or other alternative uses. And while we are not property developers ourselves, we have sort of a more limited role in that what we can physically do. And so a lot of that is meeting and convening our partners and really strongly advocating at city, county, and state levels for kind of funding mechanisms to get particularly these gaps filled, because there's a lot of funding gaps that happen. They're very expensive projects. And so that's really kind of top priority. And then I think for me and kind of my work in particular, while we're kind of working on figuring out what's happening on these upper floors, activating our ground floors. Because with the kind of loss of our downtown employees, not all of them, but we're at about a 65% return to office rate. So that's a large portion of people who aren't there anymore on a day-to-day basis. That's definitely impacted our retail and our kind of ground floor activation. So I'm working kind of closely with my team on developing and sort of pushing out some of these incentive programs to really get some new businesses downtown, get them engaged and kind of support them as they grow their business and kind of make sure they stay healthy and engaged, and kind of we can create like a more interesting and active ground floor, which makes the whole space feel safer and kind of more pleasant to be in.
Cate, as you're looking at footfall, are you seeing that the day parts are changing from where they were pre-pandemic?
Oh, yeah. And so, I think there's been some interesting data coming out on this across the country. We've seen patterns of foot traffic change. What was a 9 to 5 downtown has started to shift, where we're seeing a lot more kind of evening weekend activity, which is really interesting. It's becoming more of a place to play than just a place to work. And that definitely changes how we program our public spaces, the kinds of events that we want to do, the kind of activities that we're going to encourage. And it also changes the type of businesses that are going to succeed. If your business is catering to a 9 to 5 office population, it may not do as well as it did pre-pandemic. But, our restaurants are doing incredibly well. Our bars are doing incredibly well. We have a Target that opened in downtown 2 years ago. It has been doing incredibly well, and so we know it's doable. It's just you might have to alter and tweak your model a little bit to kind of accommodate this slightly new downtown and the kind of new patterns in downtown.
Let's look a little longer term out than 1 year. So how do you see things shaping up in your community and what's going on?
Yeah, well, so I think building on what you had just asked, I mean, I think as we're seeing a shift from a 9 to 5 downtown, we need to really be kind of focusing on creating a vibrant 18-hour neighborhood. We're not New York City. We don't necessarily need to be a 24-hour neighborhood. Pittsburgh, so we like to sleep here, but really having kind of bustling activity outside of that kind of traditional 9 to 5 and kind of growing the spaces for that. And so, that's a mixture of amenities. We need a lot more public realm amenities than we have right now, especially as we want to increase our residential population. We need playground spaces for families and younger people, so that they don't feel like they have to immediately move to the suburbs, and they can kind of grow their families in downtown. We want a mixture of types of services in downtown, really increase our entertainment options in downtown so that we have this true neighborhood, and I think we're really trying to build not just a CBD, not a central business district, but the Golden Triangle neighborhood. And I think that's the kind of long-term goal.
Great conversation. We talked a lot about data, but I want to go into dream mode for just a moment here and ask you the question that I ask all my guests. If you had a magic wand and you could cast a spell and change things to promote the vitality of downtown Pittsburgh, what would you use your wand for?
I love this question. It's such a good question. I would double our population. We'd have 15,000 downtown residents tomorrow. Of course, with the housing to support them. We want them all to have a good, affordable place to live and kind of, high quality housing options. But I think doubling that residential population would really increase that vibrancy in downtown. A lot of what I think we notice with the smaller amount of office folks is that there's just not as many feet on the street anymore. And that can change the perception of downtown. People can feel unsafe, even if they're not necessarily statistically unsafe. And so I think having a more bustling population that's there every day would be a huge benefit to our downtown. And then that would sort of help spur this additional retail development, recreational spaces, and kind of move the needle on those public amenities as well.
Well, you mentioned even while we were starting up today that Pittsburgh is now considered one of the lead affordable cities.
Yeah, it's a very, I think it's a surprisingly affordable city still. It has, like everywhere, it's been getting more expensive. And so we do want to make sure that we maintain a livability here. But Pittsburgh is still one of those cities where you can pay rent or have a house and actually enjoy the cultural amenities and the dining amenities. You can go to a play, you can go to the ballet, you can catch a Broadway show, and you don't feel like, well, okay, I'm completely bankrupt now. As someone who's lived in a lot of other cities, many of whom were much, much more expensive, Pittsburgh really gives you, I think, the ability to experience a lot of sort of big city items while kind of providing a smaller city sort of price tag, which is great, as well as a small city friendliness. I think it's one of the friendliest cities I've ever lived in.
So before we wrap up today, can you share how people can keep in touch with you and see what's going on in downtown Pittsburgh?
Oh, absolutely. People can reach out directly to me via email if they're interested, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if they want to check out our website, it's downtownpittsburgh.com. You'll be able to find our data dashboard on there and explore all the fun, cool things and see the initiatives, get connected. Feel free to sign up for our newsletters. And then, anyone's welcome to just reach out directly to me. My email and contact is on our website. And then I'm also publicly findable on LinkedIn.
Cool. Cate, thank you so much for spending time. This is a great conversation. You shared some really important insights, and I just want to thank you for spending time with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in again to Decoding Downtowns. I'd also like to thank Vistity for sponsoring the podcast. Vistity is dedicated to transforming urban districts with innovative tools that enhance economic development. You can learn more about us at vistity.com. And until next time, keep exploring and innovating in your district.
Thank you for joining us today for Decoding Downtowns. If you've enjoyed our podcast, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's brought to you by Vistity, the leading geospatial visualization platform for data-driven decisions. Stay connected, stay informed, and let's continue to shape the future of our cities together. Until next time, I'm Jamie Schwartzman.